She was stopped without reason, merely because of the color of her skin. But the officer didn't know she was the wife of the Attorney General. What began as a humiliation turned into a scandal that shook the city. The events that followed would surprise even those who had seen it all. But let's start from the very beginning. Monica James was driving home after a long day in court. The evening light reflected off her new black sedan when she noticed the flashing lights of a police car in her rearview mirror. She frowned. She was driving at the perfect speed and obeying all the rules. Pulling over to the side of the road, she saw a young officer step out of the patrol car, adjusting his belt slightly. His gaze was scrutinizing, almost challenging. Monica rolled down her window, waiting calmly for an explanation. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you know why I stopped you?" Officer Hall asked, not meeting her eyes, with a smirk that immediately put her on edge. "Honestly, no, officer. I was driving within the speed limit," she replied in an even tone. Hall hesitated, looking over the car as if calculating what else he could say. Then he declared, "Just making sure everything's all right. You can't help but notice a car like this in this neighborhood, you know." His tone was blatantly sarcastic. Monica felt her heart clench with indignation. This wasn't about safety. It was a biased check. Meanwhile, the officer asked for her documents, keeping his hand on his belt where a baton hung. She handed over her license and registration in silence. As he studied them, deliberately dragging out the time, she noticed passers-by pulling out their phones. Some whispered, others simply stood nearby, observing. "Are you from this neighborhood?" Hall asked sharply as he handed back her documents. "Yes, I live 5 minutes from here," she replied, striving to remain composed despite the sting of humiliation. "Uh-huh," he drawled, nodding but not stepping away from the car. "Well, you know, sometimes suspicious individuals show up in our area." Monica held her ground, though her voice trembled with restrained anger. "Officer, if you have no legal grounds to detain me, may I leave?" Hall took his time, lazily glancing at her license plate before looking back at her. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Bear with me a little longer." The situation grew increasingly absurd. Tension was mounting, and Monica noticed the growing expressions of discontent among the onlookers. One man standing nearby loudly asked, "Why are you holding her up? Did she do something wrong?" Hall turned, shooting a displeased glance at the crowd but said nothing. Monica looked at him firmly and stated, "Officer, either charge me or let me go." Hall frowned, but before he could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle came from behind. It was her husband, Marcus James. A sleek black SUV came to a smooth stop behind the patrol car. Out stepped a tall man in a sharp suit, his strides purposeful and his gaze icy. Marcus James, the state attorney general, walked straight to his wife's car, ignoring the curious stares of the onlookers. "Is everything all right?" he asked, leaning into Monica's window. "This officer stopped me for no reason," she replied curtly. Marcus straightened and turned to Officer Hall, who instantly stiffened at the sight of the confident man before him. "Officer, may I know on what grounds you are detaining my wife?" Marcus asked, his tone steady but firm. Hall faltered for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. "Just a routine check, sir. Nothing serious." "A routine check," Marcus repeated, staring intently at Hall. "Which, as I see, includes several questions unrelated to traffic regulations and unwarranted pressure." Hall began to stammer. "Sir, I'm just doing my job. Sometimes you have to be cautious." "Cautious?" Marcus took a step closer, his voice lowering. "My wife is a lawyer with an impeccable record. She had not committed the slightest infraction to warrant such behavior. Tell me, is this standard practice for your department?" The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, with someone even shouting, "He's right!" The tension was palpable. Feeling the situation slipping out of his control, Hall tried to assert himself. "Sir, I'd ask you not to interfere with police work." But Marcus was already dialing a number on his phone. "Then let's discuss this with your supervisor, right now." Hall paled, but tried to maintain his composure. "Sir, there's no need for that. Everything is fine. Ma'am is free to go." No, no, Marcus said, his tone still calm. You just implied suspicion. Let's file a report or call your superior. That's standard procedure, isn't it? Hall finally relented. This is a misunderstanding, sir. You're free to leave. Marcus stood unmoving, his gaze a clear message that this incident would not be forgotten. He returned to Monica's car and said calmly, "Are you all right? Let's go home." The crowd erupted in applause as they drove away. Hall remained rooted to the spot, angry at himself, but aware that this story was far from over. The next day, social media exploded. A video recorded by a bystander went viral almost instantly. The footage showed Officer Hall stopping Monica's car without cause and then fumbling under the questioning of her husband. Comments under the video expressed outrage. "How long will this continue?" And "This is why police reform is essential." Journalists quickly picked up the story, and it spread across local news. Marcus and Monica woke up to a flood of calls from reporters. Marcus, who had anticipated this, calmly prepared a statement. "This is not just about our case," he told reporters at an impromptu press conference. "This is an example of how systemic racism continues to infiltrate law enforcement. We will not let this go. We will demand change." The couple took action. Marcus filed a formal complaint with the Internal Affairs Department, calling for an investigation into Hall's actions and those of his precinct. He also initiated a request for a review of the procedures used in traffic stops. Meanwhile, Officer Hall found himself at the center of a storm of public criticism. The department leadership summoned him for a meeting. Captain Lewis, visibly frustrated, slammed the newspaper onto the table, its headline reading, "Police officer accused of racial bias." "Hall, what the hell were you thinking?" Lewis demanded, rubbing his temples. "Sir, it was a simple coincidence. I stopped her for a check, nothing personal." Hall defended himself. "Coincidence?" Lewis shot him a sharp look. "Do you realize this could destroy our entire reputation? You acted outside protocol. Now we're under the nation's microscope." While the department debated disciplinary measures, Monica continued her work. She gave an interview to a major news outlet, sharing her feelings during the incident. "It was humiliating, but not new," she said. "Many of us face this every day, and if I, as a professional, felt powerless, imagine how it feels for those without resources or connections." Her words sparked a wave of solidarity. People began sharing their own stories of unfair treatment by police. This public mobilization added significant pressure on local authorities. The tension reached its peak when activists organized a rally outside the police department. Signs read, "Justice for all," and "Systemic racism must end." At this point, it became clear. This wouldn't quietly fade away. Hall, who once believed his actions would go unnoticed, now faced the full weight of the consequences. Pressure on the police department reached a boiling point. Leadership announced the launch of an internal investigation, and Officer Hall was temporarily suspended. However, this was only the beginning. Marcus and Monica recognized they had a unique opportunity to drive meaningful change. The day after the rally, Marcus met with the city's mayor. Their conversation was tense. "We can't ignore this," Marcus said firmly, locking eyes with the mayor. "The people are demanding reform. You know this." Backed into a corner, the mayor reluctantly agreed. A special commission was formed to review police procedures. It included lawyers, human rights advocates, and community representatives. Marcus took charge of drafting new policies. Meanwhile, more instances of misconduct by Officer Hall surfaced online. His reputation plummeted. In an interview, he attempted to defend himself. "I never intended to discriminate against anyone. I was just following protocol." But the public no longer accepted his excuses. Opinion turned against him, and even his colleagues began distancing themselves. Monica, meanwhile, became the face of the police reform movement. Her speech at a city forum drew a massive audience. "I'm not here for revenge," she said, her gaze steady as she addressed the crowd. "I'm here for justice. We must change the system so that no one else experiences what I did. This isn't a personal fight, it's a fight for everyone." Her words received a standing ovation. Many were inspired by her ability to channel her pain into constructive action. Soon after, the police department introduced mandatory bias training and a revised protocol for traffic stops. The mayor announced the creation of an independent oversight board to investigate complaints against officers. Hall was officially dismissed for violating protocols and exhibiting biased behavior. However, the final chapter of his story came when he met Monica face to face at a public event. Her expression was resolute but devoid of malice. "I realize I was wrong," Hall said quietly. "I sincerely apologize for the pain I caused you." Monica nodded, her voice calm but firm. "Apologies are the first step. The key is to learn and work toward change." This moment became a symbolic resolution to their conflict. Months later, complaints against local police had noticeably decreased, and trust in city authorities began to rebuild. The story of Monica and Marcos demonstrated that even a single incident could spark significant change when met with determination. Though the journey to justice had been long and challenging, it led to meaningful outcomes that improved countless lives.